wanted to ask if my colleagues could introduce themselves. We'll start with Haley and then go down the line here.
Hey everyone.
I know.
Here I am. My name is Haley Madden. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the Morgridge Center for Public Service.
Hi everyone.
Is it on?
Hello. Hi. Hi everyone. My name is Gabby Kalani. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an instructor at the Writing Center here at UW-Madison.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Lisa Marvel Johnson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a teaching faculty at the Writing Center at UW-Madison.
Hello, my name is Beth Workmaster, and I'm a researcher in the horticulture department.
Okay, great. We're gonna go ahead and get started and talk about essentially what we did. And so, if you all came to the presentation last year, probably the first 30 minutes is going to feel like a review. You're going to hear a lot of the same things. And really what we're going to be doing with this presentation is kind of giving you an update on how things went this past year in piloting the rubric. But for those of you who didn't come, you're in luck because we're going to talk about what we're talking about. But first, I think we should start out with a positionality statement and say that we need to acknowledge the previous work of a lot of BIPOC people who came before us. I know the BIPOC might even be somewhat of a politicized term right now. I'm specifically talking about all people of color and people who identify as marginalized groups. In particular, here at University of Wisconsin-Madison, there's a lot of people on this campus who have tried to help other campus units think about how to become anti-racist. We do not corner the market on that by any means. We are, in fact, totally trying to take what they've done and lift it up instead of taking credit for what they're doing. Also, the NINA Collective, the Black Liberation Collective, which are all UW connected groups, and also here in Madison, who've done a lot of really great work. There's even some work, from Seattle and Tulsa that we took from. So I just wanted to position that. And say that the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition is also mostly a group of white administrators and specifically community engaged professionals who really care deeply about racial consciousness. And we will talk a little bit more about what brought us together and who that is, and also just humility. We lift this up. We don't think this is the best work. We don't think this is the worst work. We think it is the work for now, and we think this is the next practice that we need to be doing. But we're doing it because we saw a need. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Haley. Oh, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And we're going to be kind of tag teaming this collaboration or this presentation. We collaborate a lot, and that's kind of the spirit of our work. So the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition came together in 2020, and I think there's a lot of work around equity and justice and anti-racism that was kind of spurred into high gear in that spring and summer. We built on our previous relationship. So the core group of the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition, or BARC, is made up of, as Gavin said, of community engagement professionals who have been working together for a number of years. Our membership in the group has transitioned as folks have moved on from the university, but it's built on pretty strong relationships. Essentially, I think I just sent an email to a bunch of my friends and colleagues on campus and said, UW has to do more, we have to do more. What can we do together with our collective impact that we can't do separately? And how can we push our units, this campus, our society forward to become more anti-racist and focused on justice? We also kind of recognize the challenge of being at a big institution that I think in many ways, like we're at a diversity forum. There's a lot of people trying to do a lot of good things here, and it's still challenging because it is a big institution, a lot of moving pieces, and we all have limited power. So again, we wanted to get together to figure out what we could do. We also were in contact with a lot of students who were really involved on and off campus, who were doing their own activism, and we wanted to figure out how could we elevate their work and their voices. So we spent a fair amount of time getting together, talking to other folks on and off campus, doing our own research, in the academic and non-academic literature, trying to figure out what next steps would be. And there are a few different projects and collaborations that have come out of BARC. We're focusing on one here today, our Rubric. But that's kind of the iteration. It's, as Gavin said, as Gavin often says, we are a ragtag group. Like, this is not, we're coming from all different units on campus. We're an open group, but we share the same values that we're going to talk a little bit about. And our question was, what can we do? We also heard from different people that diversity was, maybe just the work of the DDEEA or just of a committee. And we have a little bit of a different approach. We think that work around inclusion and justice and equity is the work of everyone, and needs to be integrated into, our individual lives, our work lives, everything that we're doing in order to move forward.
Yeah, and to an extent, when we talk about the inadequate response from the University of Wisconsin, it's almost like, how could it be any other way? Of course, an institution is trying to do all that it can, but it's never going to get things right. And again, I think going back to the positionality, especially as white administrators, oftentimes you hear white people say, well, we don't really want to touch that because DDEEA is doing that, or insert fill in the blank diversity committee here. So we didn't want to be those people who just threw up their hands and said, well, let's just let them do it. We really do need to feel like we own that work as professionals in higher ed. All right, so the Badger Anti-Racist Coalition, I just want to acknowledge Christine and Sarah who are in the back. Hi. Are some of our other members, but as I mentioned, we're largely community engagement professionals. We have regular meetings about monthly. We have about 10 to 20 faculty and staff, ragtag group, right? Nobody appointed us. We were just frustrated and we came together. We are trying to approach this from a community organizing approach. I'm assuming that a lot of people in this room understand what that means, but essentially working in the context to build power of working within the context of a large organization to build power among people who are decision makers informally and formally, trying to understand what people's self-interests are, being able to identify those interests, and providing a platform for being able to take action on what those interests are by doing joint work together. That's what we mean by a community organizing approach. And oftentimes I think you hear community organizing and you think outside of campus, but we are such a large institution that in some ways we're kind of like a small city, and we are trying to organize within the context of a small city with many different interests. I don't think there is one self-interest of UW-Madison. We have very different interests within the context of one large institution. We also wanted to try to lift up student voices. Unfortunately, this is not happening as much right now because some of the students that we had been working with have graduated and moved on to other things. But these were students who had, tried to get meetings with the chancellor, shown up to protests, felt like they continued to get put off by the administration. No, we don't have time to meet with you. Meet with this person instead. Just kind of getting the runaround. And so what we wanted to do was take cues from people who were, from students who were in that space. And yeah, I wanted to turn it over to Haley and see if you want to add something.
Sure, I'll just point out a couple challenges. We've had a fair amount of turnover in our group. UW can sometimes be a difficult place to be and to work at, and that's something that we've experienced. Folks who are really committed to justice sometimes we've noticed have a harder time being retained, and so that's made some progress a little bit more uneven than we would like. There's also variable support from the units that we're in. Depending on the units that we're coming from, we might have more or less support from our supervisors. We might be doing this kind of off hours or a little bit under the radar. Interesting for me to say in a public space here. And just trying to keep this work top of mind for everyone has been a challenge, but nevertheless, our little ragtag group is moving onward.
Yeah, I would also say one more challenge that we experienced was, I don't know, I feel like almost uncomfortable saying this in a really public space, but who cares? What are you gonna do, fire me? Essentially, it's hard to make sure that you vet the right kind of people involved in this work, because there's a lot of people who say they want to be involved in this work, and you don't really know where they're coming from. I mean, hell, who are we even to be coming to this work? So I feel like, in a sense, when we're involved in this work, we start off as like this ragtag group, but then we become like some kind of gatekeepers for this work. We don't want just anyone getting involved. I mean, we had a couple of people who came to us and were like, we don't really like the language that you're using. We think the language should be softened. What about this? And it's like, well, we feel like the institution needs to be pushed forward, and we realize that might not be what your jam is. So maybe you shouldn't work with us. And so I do think that there's a little bit of like, who really gets to do this work? I don't have an answer for that, but it's just kind of like, let's see, do they keep showing up? What kinds of feedback do they have? There's no real good way to put that other than just like, we're trying to make sure that this work is in the hands of the people who are really here, really trying to do the work, struggle, have humility about it, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, we'll go to the next slide.
So something like a question that came up as we're trying to figure out, all right, we've got this group of people together. We feel like we're supported by each other. We've got some solidarity. Now what do we do? One thing we noticed is that when folks are working around anti-racism, there's a lot of interest in like education. So what can we learn? And that's really important. You know, we all need to continue learning and growing and continuing that self-development work, and sometimes in groups, you know, maybe through reading books together in book clubs, workshops, things like that. But then there was often a difficulty we heard in like figuring out what the next step is. Okay, like our unit, our staff, we want to do something more, but what would that look like beyond a workshop or us reading this article together? And so one of our founding members actually thought of something from the Office of Sustainability called the Green Event Checklist or some, I think that's what it's called. So like a little checklist you have for an event you're hosting to see if you're making sustainable choices. And we thought, well, could we build on that? You know, I recall that our office went through these different levels of becoming a more sustainable office. Like you started as like maybe an acorn, and then you were like a sapling, and then a tree. And it was, you know, it was fun. It helped us figure out, you know, what does sustainability look like in practice? And so we built on that, except for anti-racism. We were trying to figure out if a unit wanted to be more anti-racist, or if a staff, a center, a department, what would that actually look like? What would those commitments be? And then how could folks turn that into practice? And so that was kind of the birth of our rubric.
Okay. Just guiding beliefs, I just feel like it's important to put this out there. We felt like we were trying to come together around shared power and mutual respect, in the sense of everybody around this table has power, and we want to acknowledge that not one person corners the market on power, and then also trying to understand where people are coming from and respecting where they're coming from. We didn't agree on everything, and we just tried to work it out. I mean, there were a couple of times where, you know, for instance, I said some really off color things, I think, and then one of my colleagues was like, look, I heard you say this, I don't think that's what you meant, but I wanted to talk through it. I mean, this kind of like, you know, presuming positive intentions is one thing that you often talk about, but mutually respectful of like, look, I know you're trying to come here and do this work. You're not always getting it right. Let me tell you how you didn't get it right for me this time. I don't think that's what you meant. And it's not like a defensive, like, hey, what do you mean by that? You know, it's more of, okay, you know, I respect where you're coming, you respect where I'm coming from. Also, transparency and intentional communication. We felt like it was really important for all the BARC members to know what was going on, and we had very intentional communication. As I mentioned to you, not necessarily everyone can steward and practice this work forward, and at least being transparent about like, this is kind of what we're thinking, this is, you know, and also the intentional communication, I feel like goes back to this community organizing approach. When you are a community organizer, you don't just go off willy-nilly and talk to anyone about anything. You power map your organization, and you try to find decision makers, and you say, what are you trying to do, decision maker? And so how do you intentionally communicate with people about like, we really would like your buy-in on this. We need your help with this part of the rubric, and not just saying, we want you to be a part of anti-racism on campus. We're trying to be intentional in communicating. And equitable distribution of resources. I think that was another thing that really went into our thinking about the rubric, in the sense of, so often resources are not equitably distributed in this predominantly white institution. And so what we wanted to embed within the rubric was a sense of our decisions being made transparently and all resources being distributed equitably. So those are like things going through our mind, not only within BARC, but also as we created the rubric. Okay, the next one that I agreed that I would start and Haley would finish this one. The timeline, implementation, and sustainability with the actual rubric, and we're going to talk about exactly what that means. We have completed a draft, and this past spring semester, we engaged in a pilot, a pilot program, and what we asked for the pilot groups, and they're going to tell you very honestly about what their experiences were. We asked the end of the spring through summer to give us feedback. What did you like? What did you not like? What was helpful? What was not helpful? And then we wanted to think about how does this sustain. So a lot of people were like, well, what can we do? What's the next steps? The next steps are like whatever you think your organization can do for the next steps. This is not us coming in as, like for instance, the Office of Strategic Consulting gets hired to lead a project forward. We are not being hired by an organization. The question is there political will within your unit, campus unit, to carry this forward? We will continue to be here to help you host meetings and facilitate discussions, but we are not here to keep the work going. So we had to be very honest about what we could do within the limited confines of, frankly, our not official work time that we're working on this stuff. Haley.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, this is a collaborative, iterative process. So we're not looking to create something perfect. We're recognizing we're trying to do what we can with what we have and continue to improve things as we get more information. And so the pilot groups are really helpful. We're hoping to continue to improve this as we learn more. And we also recognize, we did what we could with our expertise. We built on a lot of resources. You can see more on our website. And we're just trying to improve this all the time. We're trying to share, something that is hopefully useful. And in this slide, you can see the domains that we've built out. As you take a peek, you'll probably see there are things that are missing for the academic context, such as research. We don't have any faculty in our core group. We would love more input about what needs to be considered as we think about research.
We had some consultation from some faculty.
Yes, we have some consultation, for sure. But a part of why we're here today is because we want feedback. We want to continue to make this useful. And, again, hoping to continue updating it.
Yeah, and we as people, just to give you a little insight into the community engaged scholarship world, we think a lot about community-based research and how it is valued or not valued in tenure and promotion processes, such as like, why would faculty get involved in solving community problems? We're not incentivized to do that. That's not a statement to be anti-faculty. It's just to say the structures of the university do not support those kinds of things. And so why, if they're not getting recognized for it, it's not part of their TMP process, why would they do it? So I think when we thought like the faculty domain, we thought, oh, okay, that's research. We don't want to touch that too much because that's kind of what they deal with. But we got immediate feedback, almost like, how come we don't have a research thing? It's like, yeah, we probably should have one for research. But anyway, these are the 12 domains. We're not going to read them to you. We will go through a couple of examples. But the 4 levels for evaluation, this was like a big discussion that we had within BARC, right? Like, okay, so you have a rubric. How do you grade yourself? Do you have a numerical score? And I think these screen events actually give you maybe not a numerical score, but they give you, the acorn, Zeppelin, whatever. So there's a way to be able to tell how you're doing. Are you doing really well, or like there are lots of blind spots? So we agreed on like a 4-level evaluation criteria. Level 0 is basically you're colluding with power. You're not questioning any power structures right now. Level 1 is that you are kind of reifying norms, at least. You're just kind of keeping things going. Level 2 is, we want to make sure people feel like belonging, as in there's some discussion about this topic around anti-racism, but it's really just like a tilt of the hat to be like, yep, we know it exists. Move on. Not let's do something about it. And then level 3, we call it shared power and liberation. So basically, we are redoing structures to really think about how to reorient our work toward anti-racism. Yeah.
Can you clarify, what's the difference between level 0 and 1?
Level 0, I think, is more harmful. Like, you're not even asking the question. You are completely blind to the issue. Level 1 is, yeah, we might ask a question, but really, like, we're not going to act on it. We're not going to think too deeply about it. We realize that it is an issue that's on the agenda, but whatever. Level 2 is where you might put some signs up, or we might have a conversation about this. We might even have a diversity committee. No offense to anybody who has a diversity committee. But level 3 is where you're actually taking steps to change policy. That's kind of how we were thinking. This just kind of gave people an opportunity to score themselves on the rubric if they wanted, but really it's just a model. I mean, the fancy academic way, heuristic, like, is something that helps you think differently about the way that you're doing things. Now we're going to give a couple of examples.
So hopefully this example, you can kind of read the text behind me, hopefully, gives you some more information about what might this look like in practice. This is not something that I worked on. Our colleague from the Center for Humanities created this, but you can see, the question, we kind of tried to phrase different areas as questions to help think through how would we answer this as a unit or department, recognizing too that not all of these questions, if you go to the rubric, which is, you can take a peek out online, not all of these are going to be relevant to you or your unit. So you're kind of looking at what makes sense for us to answer. So the question here, how does your unit acknowledge its own history of racism and oppression, kind of has these different levels based on what your own unit might do, from this isn't something we've ever thought about, to this is something that we've thought deeply about, updated what we're doing, tried to make amends for past wrong, past harm, and move forward in a more liberatory way. We also there in that other column have resources that might be helpful.
It didn't show up. Sorry, it didn't show up in the program.
There's a hidden column that highlights the UW Public History Project, which is a resource, for a department considering this question.
Yeah.
How do you define unit? Excuse me.
Yeah, unit is just an entity on campus that generally would have its own budget, that has staff. I mean, it's super vague. And actually, this was one of the issues that we had of, like, what if you're not an academic department? What if you're, whatever. It's hard. Just an entity that has some sort of budget and has some sort of staff. Vaguest sense. But the resources were a really important part. And if you go on again, ragtag group, y'all. If you go on the website, you will see that not most of the resources things are missing, because we don't know great resources in all these categories. So if you know some good ones, help us plop it in that resource category, because some people do need help and assistance. Just as another example, this is something, oh, cool, resources showed up here. This is something that I care deeply about, for instance, purchasing. How are you spending money within your department? So what businesses are we purchasing from, and where are they coming from? And level 0, obviously, like, not transparent. Nobody knows. Up to, like, yeah, we look at all the vendors for purchasing, but we really don't talk about it regularly in staff meetings. Level 2 would be like, we try to purchase local, basically. We purchase local. Okay, fine. Level 3 is like, yes, we purchase local. We are actively trying to recruit. I'm going to put this in quotes. I don't like it, but it's the state designation. Minority and women-owned business category. That is the resource that we have over there, is minority and women-owned businesses. We might even go a level further and say that we are actively trying to build the capacity of minority and women-owned businesses to be competitive for our RFP processes that we put out. Now, you all, as, I don't know, an academic unit, the only thing that you all might be purchasing is catering and office supplies or something. That could still be done using this framework of anti-racism. But if there's anyone in here from facilities planning and management, and you're looking at bidding out capital projects, this is really the one for you. You need to be paying attention, because that's where the real money is. And if you have any friends who can influence in that area, please let me know. As a fellow organizer, we're trying to organize in that realm. So hopefully this gives you just two quick examples of the domains and what this rubric is all about. I'm going to turn it over to two of the pilot sites, one the Writing Center, one in horticulture, as you heard, and y'all take it away. And you can advance yourself.
All right, can folks hear me? Excellent. So Lisa and I are from the Writing Center, and we wanted to give folks an overview kind of there we go. Of our experience implementing the rubric and a timeline for how we did so. So I attended the Diversity Forum last year and listened to the BARC talk about the diversity or the anti-racism rubric, and I thought, well, the Writing Center should do this. So I took it to the Writing Center and shared those presentation materials with Lisa and other members of the Writing Center's Anti-Racism Standing Committee. Talks about a diversity committee. And then we reached back out to BARC to sign up to be a pilot unit. Over the course of December 2021 and February 2021, the Anti-Racism Standing Committee, at that time just 3 members of the Writing Center's staff, submitted feedback to BARC about the rubric, and specifically looking through all of the tabs of the rubric to note our questions and complications and additional relevant information. Then in February 2022, we reached out to the rest of the career Writing Center staff to solicit interest in applying the rubric to our context at the Writing Center. And so the next month we met as a whole BARC committee then for the Writing Center to discuss our and the Writing Center's anti-racist values and draft a statement of intent to send to BARC. Then throughout that month, we held our second meeting to establish norms and create a process for the pilot of the rubric. And we practiced filling out one strand of the rubric together, kind of as like a norm setting, and then assigned participants of the committee to asynchronously complete the remaining strands. And then finally, the next month, we met for our final meeting to debrief and generate feedback for BARC on our implementation of the rubric. Overall, our reaction to the rubric was very positive. It helped us think about different ways that we were implementing anti-racism and ways that blind spots, right? Ways that we hadn't really thought, oh, this is another category or area where we can focus our anti-racism efforts and be in alignment with our values. Both the Writing Center's director and the director of writing across the curriculum participated in our BARC committee meetings. So we had leadership available there to think through this with us, but also to think about where are the roadblocks to the Writing Center really acting in alignment with its values, and that was really helpful to us. And overall, we were really grateful for a process that could lend structure to our goal of making the Writing Center a leader for anti-racism on campus. And I'm going to hand it to Lisa to talk a little bit more.
Okay, thanks, Gabby. So a few areas that were really helpful with our participation in the process and some least helpful aspects. So what was most helpful about going through this process was it helped us to generate some clear and manageable steps at the Writing Center.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So it helped us to generate some clear and manageable steps the Writing Center could take in order to be more actively anti-racist. So kind of exactly as y'all described at the beginning, you know, we had done a lot in terms of education and reading. Of course, we're the Writing Center, so that was really, you know, something of interest to us. But we really felt like, okay, we need to take actionable steps here. So I think that that was a real benefit from going through this process. It also allowed us to consider the various ways that the Writing Center could contribute to anti-racism efforts through the various strands. I think it was really helpful to get this Excel spreadsheet and have all of these different aspects of anti-racism that we might not have thought about otherwise. So for example, that history tab, I don't think we were necessarily thinking about how the Writing Center's history could contribute to anti-racism or our facilities, because we don't have a lot of control over our facilities necessarily. So that really wasn't at top of mind, but it was helpful for us to know like the different areas of depth that we could go into. Some least helpful aspects, so as kind of already alluded to here, the Writing Center isn't like an academic department. We kind of live inside the English department. So our autonomy is a little bit limited in certain areas. So there were things on the rubric that didn't really apply to us, and we were having some difficulty figuring out how to like transpose that element for our own context. So that was kind of a more challenging aspect. Okay, so what we learned through this process, many things. I'll just talk about a few here. And I will say that, the Writing Center is really committed to anti-racism, and I think we were committed before this and continue to be. So it's not like we were just coming to this rubric with like totally fresh eyes, had never considered these things. So I'll just say that it was helpful in kind of deepening our commitments here. So one thing we learned is that we need to have increased transparency in our policies and procedure. So there is a group of people who lead the Writing Center, career staff, also TA leaders, including Gabby last year. And, we keep a lot of policies and procedures kind of discussed within that core group. But we also have a large number of instructors who are not part of our leadership board or that group, and I think we needed to do a better job of being transparent about how we were making changes and really opening lines of communication. We also learned that we could improve our collaboration with BIPOC communities in Madison. So there are certain arms of the Writing Center that are involved in more community initiatives, like the Odyssey Project. We have a strong collaboration with them, and also Madison Writing Assistance. But when we're thinking about the Writing Center itself, sometimes those lines of communication and that collaboration is not as porous. So for us, we thought about, okay, how can we really be integrating community members into more aspects of what we do? We also learned that we had aspects of our pedagogical training and offerings that hadn't really been updated to explicitly center anti-racism and inclusive teaching more broadly. So at the Writing Center, there's quite a lot of teaching that we do in lots of different ways. So for example, we have workshops. We also train our instructors. Also, our instructors are teachers, right? So there's just lots of points of education, and not all of them had really been adequately revamped and made sure that anti-racism, inclusivity, justice is really at the center of those offerings. And then finally, we needed to consider religious and cultural calendars when scheduling our events and offerings. We had kind of been following the standard UW practice of just having instructors kind of tell us when they needed to have time off, but we weren't kind of building that into the way that we were scheduling events. So that's something that we could improve, and that's something that we learned. Okay, and then this is the hard part, right? So once you learn all these things, how do you actually implement them? How do you go from just learning something to actually taking action? And I'll say, since, it's only been a matter of months since we've gone through and filled out the rubric, I don't think this is some panacea or that all of these action steps that we've taken have fully responded to everything that we need to do, but these are some first steps. So we begin to plan this assessment project that will happen in the spring to better understand how our instructors are implementing anti-racist teaching in their Writing Center sessions, so that we can really gain an understanding of how anti-racism is embedded in the context of our teaching, or not, and then how we can respond to that. in a more robust way. We're including more TAs, more instructors on our standing committees in order to increase our transparency and take into account their perspectives. We've included more BIPOC scholars and perspectives in our dissertation writing camp materials, so we've begun the process of kind of going through some more of our educational offerings and making sure that we see anti-racism at its core. We've had discussions about how to ensure that instructors' religious and cultural holidays are considered right from the beginning in our planning. And we have some nascent kind of ideas about how to do this and make sure this is equitable for our instructors. And then our all-staff meetings this semester have centered disability in the Writing Center, social identities, and also using intentional language. Okay, so our advice to other units. Not a ton of advice here, just a few points. So as Gabby kind of went through, we completed the work of responding to the rubric in about 3 one-hour-long meetings. And this time commitment was low in comparison to the perspectives that we gained. So we'll say, like, this is not some extensive, time commitment thing that you have to engage in, but in fact, it's, could be pretty quick. It's also helpful to involve leadership in this process if possible. It was great to have leadership's buy-in right from the beginning. And then in the planning phase of your work, consider how you'll move from discussion to action. So of course, we love discussing things, we love reading things, but it's very important to take solid, concrete action, and I think building that in right from the beginning is really critical. Okay, thanks all.
Do you want to come up? Oh, that is supposed to go to the podium. Cool,
Is that
great,
right?
yeah, sounds good to me.
I don't
know, she doesn't have
Nope.
a slide.
Hello. We do not have slides, so I'm just going to talk to you and tell you what we did. So I think this will be a really interesting contrast as being from the horticulture department. So we're an academic department, and just to give you a sense of our the number and types of people who comprise our department, we have to talk about faculty, different types of staff, and graduate students and postdocs. We have a total of 122 people currently. And so we have 16 faculty, but we also have a branch of the USDA Agricultural Research Service. We have some scientists who are integrated into our department. And so 6 of those 16 faculty are from the USDA. And then we have 4 university staff, administrators, and then 44 support staff, and that's made up of people from 2 different units, the Allen Centennial Garden, the Nutrient and Pest Management Program, again, and UW academic staff, but also 8 USDA scientists, support scientists, and 44 graduate students and 14 postdocs. And so we're a very diverse group just in terms of types of positions. And just to keep that flavor of that composition in mind as I describe what we did. Our department does have an equity and diversity committee, and of which I work on, and it's also a little bit different potentially than a lot of departments in that our equity and diversity committee is open. It's an open door policy. Anybody who wants to participate is welcome. It's not an assigned committee, and so we have a great diversity of faculty, staff, and graduate students currently, including some of the USDA people. So what happened last year was that 2 of our Equity and Diversity Committee members attended the BARC session and brought the idea back to the committee. Ultimately, one of these people, Christy Stewart, took the lead on coordinating our implementation of this. And so I'm mostly just the messenger. Christy did a ton of work. We quickly realized that we wanted to participate in this, but that we would have trouble in light of the other projects that we had going on and people's already commitments to other things, to complete the entire rubric. And so we had a subcommittee of our meeting met to prioritize the topics for us, that maybe we could target certain ones that then we could dive into a little more deeply. And we also had a lot of concern about who gets to be the arbiters of our status and progress, and that would be potentially divisive. That Gavin alluded to before about the idea of who gets to be the gatekeepers, and many people on the committee felt very strongly that we did not want to hold that role, that we wanted to open it up as much as possible for discussion. So we decided to work with two sections first, and we chose the curriculum section because we felt that was an overall top priority for an academic department. And then we chose history from the standpoint of wanting to gauge our sense of awareness of our own history, and how that might be influencing our current practices. So we had a few committee members plus 2 other department members who volunteered to help facilitate the discussions. And so each session was held in May of 2022. And in addition to the 2 facilitators, we ended up with 9 other attendees at the curriculum discussion and 8 attendees at the history discussion. So you can think of those numbers in context of the whole size of our department. We emailed the department-wide to invite people, and in an attempt to try to minimize resistance to participating in such a thing, imagining that this might cause concern or defensiveness on people's parts, that we tried to emphasize a welcoming message, that we wanted to encourage a range of perspectives and opinions, knowing that might make it more challenging to land on a score. But we also used a set of discussion guidelines prior to the beginning of each session to try to lay out that we wanted people to feel welcome, and that people should be speaking from their own viewpoint, that probably set of discussion guidelines that most of us are familiar with. And we also wanted to acknowledge up front that dealing with these topics that could very easily raise discomfort in people, and to acknowledge that might very well happen, and that's still okay, and that we still wanted to have the discussions. So we would say that the type of reception in our unit was that there wasn't active resistance against doing this. I suppose it was more of a hesitancy to participate. I think you find in an academic department across the board, people are going to say, wow, that sounds really great, I would love to participate, but, and then it's the but I'm too busy, or but I have back-to-back meetings, and it's not, and they're not lying, so there is part of that. It was touched on before about the idea of what people are given credit and incentivizing participation. We also we're a horticulture department, and we do agricultural research, and this was May by the time we started organizing this, actually late April. And so, so things thaw and the world gets going, and so we ran up against the beginning of researchers' field seasons, and that was a very realistic logistical problem. And also the conclusion of the semester. And so where the impetus for this came from our Equity and Diversity Committee as basically one of our projects to try to implement. The most helpful aspect of doing this was that this really sparked conversations for people, both the formal date of the discussions that we held, which was held hybrid, both in person and by Zoom. And a lot of the discussions have led to other things, such that the curriculum discussion inspired a second discussion session that was just held a couple of weeks ago, and the focus of that was to move it from talking just talk about a rubric and a focus on scoring as opposed to moving into talking about our department's activities and accomplishments, and to move the responsibility to the department's curriculum committee. And so the faculty person who helped facilitate the original rubric discussion is a member of the curriculum committee, and so she, along with the committee members working on this, are working to help move that then into the curriculum committee so that it actually becomes a discussion that leads to policy. And in the history section, that really helped to stimulate an upcoming project of addressing how to present our department's activities and various accomplishments and our history in our public spaces. So I was the one who asked the hallway question to Tia Miles, because that's something that we're wanting to actively deal with, as to how do we present our past as well as present our opportunities for the future. And we found that the least helpful aspect of trying to implement the rubric was that within the sessions, there was significant time was taken during the sessions to clarify questions and terminology. Especially within the curriculum session, there were questions about, people were very concerned about, is this question about what an individual instructor is doing and striving towards, or is this about departmental policy and like an averaging across the department? So people were very hesitant to try to land on a number because we had quite a wide spectrum of people's activities of what they were doing for instruction in their classes. And also, we did find in some cases that there were comments that feeling that some of the tone of several of the scoring levels were potentially a turnoff or defensive triggering, even in people who genuinely would want to engage. And so we recognized sort of like the bare truth of things, but we also have the goal of wanting to bring people along and to help and to be instrumenting change by doing it and bringing people along with us in that way. And so one other aspect of our concern was that we thought might be helpful beforehand would be to think of ways that we can basically help to prepare our audience to be able to take this on. Because we are asking, because whether or not we like it, that it's a big ask to ask people who have been invested and engaged in processes with their best of intentions, and all of a sudden to ask them to evaluate themselves in a very strict way. And so if there were, and we find this with a lot of our projects, is that how do we help to kind of set the table so that people want to come to dinner? Our major takeaways was that while we tried to assign scores from the rubric, after our discussion of a given question, we mostly found that the scores were actually less relevant than simply piquing our interest and raising awareness of like, oh yeah, that's kind of a whole. So maybe we were fuzzy rubric followers, but that it has really helped us to move into thinking of projects and areas that then we can go ahead and implement. I should also say that after each session that we held, we also had a short survey afterwards to ask the participants, really just 3 simple questions of did you feel this discussion was useful? what was the most helpful aspect of it, and is there anything else that we could do in these types of discussions that would be helpful? And the response by the majority of respondents was that yes, they found it either helpful or very helpful in the discussions. What surprised us the most about our experience was that initially we were very optimistic in how much ground we might be able to cover, right? You see like, oh, rubric, 12 things, check, we got it. And then, but we found that we quickly realized that the amount of care and effort that we realized that we wanted to apply to this, that we had to put our brakes on and to really reevaluate what our goals of using the rubric would be. We were pleasantly surprised, though, at the participation that did happen and the level and depth of discussions that we were able to have. So our advice to people looking to pilot this rubric would be to think of your own unit's goals and to identify digestible chunks for consideration, like what can you all take on, and to keep a long-term vision of your unit's goals, because we realized when we have a lot of discussions in our committee about how we're in this for the long haul, and that iterative process we're gonna go around many times. And finally, that really important to have a designated leader for this initiative. It doesn't happen just by people, fuzzily saying so. And I think we find that with almost everything, right, that we undertake, and this is no exception. And that finally, that identifying some type of pre-work that might be necessary to get people to feel welcome to participate. That was another thing. So that was our experience.
Okay, I know we do want to move into questions, but I'm just going to zing through a couple things that people triggered my thinking. We did send a framework for like what an introductory email would look like for them. Like, here's what we recommend: initial meeting with your people, a couple of meetings throughout the semester, then have a debrief meeting with us. So we gave a little bit of some structure, not too much. Obviously, we have capacity issues. This is not throwing anyone under the bus. If you're one of these people that did apply or contact us last year, 14 entities on campus expressed an interest in piloting this rubric, and 2 entities completed. So that's just like, it's more than a notion to be like, oh, we'd like to do this. It takes a lot of work, and it obviously, as you heard, a lot of structure, and people are willing to move it forward. And even though some people thought they were ready, they might not have actually been ready. People chose what domains to tackle. You don't have to eat the pizza in one bite. You break it up into slices. And we also made the choice to make this about anti-racism explicitly, not anti-otherisms. And I think we got a lot of pushback. What about LGBT issues? What about gender equity? And we kind of came to like, if we're all doing anti-racist practice, we kind of get to those things, I think. But we had to prioritize that. We just made a decision to prioritize that. Okay, with that, I think we're happy to take any questions that people have. Or, yeah. Oh, do we have another slide? Oh, crap, yeah, we do. Here's how you can help us. Basically, just like, give us feedback. What you heard here was like, we did not script anything, what they said. We did not ask them to run anything by us first. They were giving like the honest truth, and as you heard, some things were helpful, some things were not helpful. So we need your help to make this an improved rubric. If you really are like serious about this work, we'd love to have you as part of the BARC group. But again, if you're not really serious, love you, but like don't really want you on BARC. Maybe you could just like keep coming and showing up, and maybe push this. But if you have time to dedicate at least an hour or 2 per month, we'd love to have you. Maybe you could be an advisory member or something like that. But if anyone wants to contact me, this is my personal Gmail address, and you can find our website here. Now, I think with that, we will be happy to take questions.
We've not gotten questions.
Okay.
Online.
Read it. Read them. Bring them to me.
This is for the Writing Center.
Ah.
How are you assessing
assessing the effects of your changes from a pedagogical perspective?
Hi everyone again. So the question was, how are you assessing the effects of your changes from a pedagogical perspective? Yeah. So we are running as I alluded to, an assessment project that will occur in the spring of 2023 currently. And so that is going to be focused on how our instructors are implementing specific anti-racist teaching strategies within the context of their Writing Center sessions. So in that case, we are actually formally running an assessment project, and we will be tracking those results and then responding to those results. Outside of that assessment project, I will say we don't have plans for formal assessment, but we very regularly are surveying our instructors. We're in the process right now of doing a month-long survey of our students who come to the Writing Center, specifically with questions on that survey about how they are experiencing our center and how they are understanding our implementation of anti-racist practices within both of those contexts. So I think we're trying to really hear from a lot of different people and open up channels of communication around that. For every one of our new initiatives, do we have like a very specific regimented assessment project in mind? No, not necessarily. But as I said, we are hoping to kind of keep channels of communication open in order to hear that feedback from students, instructors, and then also career staff.
Any in-person questions before we go? Okay, yeah.
I have one. This is for both of the groups or either of the groups. How did you approach identifying facilitators for your in-unit conversations?
For horticulture, we put it out there. We sent an email to the entire department asking for if anyone was interested. The two people who facilitated the curriculum discussion, one was a faculty member, the other was a postdoc, both with a lot of experience in teaching and a commitment to instruction. And then for the history one, that was also just of people who were interested. And so it was myself and one other person who was a postdoc. So.
For the Writing Center, I think that there's always a very intentional approach to inviting folks to participate in different initiatives because we want, especially our graduate instructors, to be compensated for their time. And so we knew that this was going to take at least three-hour meetings or so. And so we really were intentional about opening it up to career staff and TA leaders who had more room in their appointment levels to make that work.
Great. Yes, ma'am.
For the units who participated in this rubric, can you give us some concrete examples of what you actually applied within your units beyond just the discussion piece and like where this information is living in your units? Have you created spaces online for this information or how you're revisiting this? I guess I just feel a little vague about what were the actionable steps that you made changes in?
Can I see the PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this slide most specifically speaks to your question about how we're implementing the learning that we were able to take through the process of completing the rubric. And I'll say that this is not exhaustive. It's not necessarily reflective of responding to every single place where we saw shortcomings in the Writing Center, but just over the course of the few months that we've had since going through the rubric, this is essentially some steps that we were able to take in the right direction. In terms of like where does the rubric live online, or are we publishing these results more broadly? We haven't taken that step, and I think that's because we really saw the rubric as a starting place, like a way of kind of evaluating how we were doing, but not necessarily something that we had vetted across, all of our leadership necessarily, or that our responses or our language to those points in the rubric were exactly, what we would want to have from kind of like a public-facing audience. So for us, I think it was more like this is a generation, like generating a spark, some ideas and ways of moving forward, rather than necessarily like now we have a clear understanding of exactly how anti-racism is operating in our center, because that is a huge task.
I would just add that I think that we held as equal goals both like steps that the Writing Center can take and understanding of where the Writing Center's at, but also giving feedback to BARC. And so we were really intentional about going through, like one of the reasons why we prioritized going through all of the strands of the rubric was because we wanted to let them know what our experience as a campus unit and a uniquely situated campus unit was interpreting the rubric as it was.
I would say for horticulture that partly from the standpoint of that implementing this as a pilot, that the results of our discussions and the points that were made were sort of we have not posted them in any kind of public accessible place because it's sort of meant for in-house use, I guess I would say, and that from the two topics that we used or that we implemented, that we're using those to move forward into moving into the appropriate departmental areas of structure of committees, and so whether it needs to go to a specific committee or whether it needs to go through the departmental shared governance of the department meeting or the executive committee meeting or the chair, in terms of identifying where does policy need to change in order to be implemented. And we did also, I forgot to mention this at the end, but we have identified for ourselves that since we prioritized the topics that we wanted to implement, that our plan is in subsequent semesters that we feel that if we continue in the same structure that we've done, that we'll do 2 each semester. And so that'll keep us busy for a while.
Is there another online question?
Yes. Here's a good one.
Uh-oh.
I am so curious about your relationship with UW's quote-unquote formal DEI department and area. What do they think of your initiative? Do they see you, support you? My 2 cents, an authentic and effective DEI initiative should support community voice and action, both internal and external. Good work! Exclamation mark.
This is complicated because here we are at the DDEA Diversity Forum. So yeah, I mean, I think, listen, DDEA let us present at last year's Diversity Forum. They were interested in knowing what we were doing. They gave us a platform. Hundreds of people now know about what we do because DDEA said, yes, we are interested in supporting your work. Sarah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to comment that I think DEI committees, we've seen one, you've seen one. Their origin stories are as unique as the units that they come from. So this would really help with some of that bridging of, do you know about this? Is it of interest? How does it align? Maybe we lift each other in different ways. So I just want to remove an assumption that anybody may be holding about DEI committees being any one thing. They're working on a whole variety of features, and they may or may not know about this. We may not know about what they're doing, but this is a great opportunity for the cross-walking.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So much more diplomatic than I typically am, which is why I'll never move up in higher ed, I don't think. I think, but you're right. That's like at the DEI committee level, and there's even questions about what are their relationships like with, the formal campus structure. But I think like once some campus diversity committees got a hold of like what we were doing, it was kind of like a suspicion, maybe like a curiosity of like, what are you doing over there? You know, you're implementing this rubric, and I think there's like an initial kind of like, wait a minute, are you saying that like we're not doing this? Or are you saying that like the institution isn't supportive of this? And I think like when you live in the world of community engagement, which if anyone here is a community engaged scholar or practitioner, you know that like the community is always saying like, ugh, UW, you know, like they come up here, they think that, you know, when they come in, they think they're, you know, the best thing since sliced bread, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And so you hear pushback often from community members, and you hear good things too. And then you hear people saying, oh, UW's trying, you know, whatever. So I think we kind of live in this space of like, we hear some like external critiques often, and that's part of the reason why we are called to do what we do, is because we want to change those things. So I think there was kind of like a, you know, what do you mean community members aren't involved in academic departments? And what do you mean, like, I can't, like, you know, we don't hear this. It's like, well, that's because you're not in our field. And so you might approach it differently. So I think there was a little bit of like hesitancy, maybe a little bit of skepticism about who we are and what we're doing. Like, are you saying UW's bad? And it's like, no, I'm just saying like we all own this work and we'd like to be a part of it. We're all hands on deck, right? And again, we got accepted to present at this year's Diversity Forum. So I don't think it's like animosity toward us. I mean, I don't want you to think if you sign up for the BARC rubric, DEA is going to put you on some sort of a list or something. I think, I mean, the simple answer is like anything that can help move our campus forward in the DEI space is welcomed. And I think like no one came and tried to like shut us down and like tell us to not do it, whatever. But it's like, you know, I think there's just a little bit of like, we don't really know who you are and we don't know what you're doing. And again, as I mentioned back to in the beginning, like the gatekeeping, I think there is a certain level of like, who are you and what brings you to this work and why, you know, how come we haven't sat down and met? And we eventually did like sit down and meet with them, but like we tried to get some emails out to them. Look, like after the murder of George Floyd, like everybody wanted to talk to DEA and talk about like, what can we do for DEI? Like there are only so many people. So it's not like just putting things on them and saying, how come you didn't, you know, respond to that email? It's like, no, like we're doing our best. You're doing your best. And like, let's all be in the same team. And here we are. You know, I don't know if anyone, you want to, okay. Haley's like, no. Okay, other questions in-house? Yes.
I guess I'm thinking about scale of implementation and like, can you all talk about pros and cons of doing it at like a subunit scale of the writing center versus the whole English department, or like horticulture, you could have done subunits within horticulture, and why you chose the way you chose?
That is a really good question. And I think the reason why we went ahead and kept it on the whole department level was because it sort of came through our Equity and Diversity Committee, which is department-wide and welcoming to everybody in the department. And so, but it is true that potentially with smaller units within that, since we have some different programs, that maybe we could have a different structure to it all. But that said, then it would almost be like, yeah, it would be a separate application of the rubric because certain of our subunits just aren't involved in some of the topics, at least not in the most direct way. So, but it's a good question.
So I think because I was a TA leader at the Writing Center last year, that it made sense for me to bring this to the Writing Center first. And I think that some of the pros of that is that both the director of the Writing Center and Writing Across the Curriculum were on that committee and using this rubric and aware of what we were doing. And then some cons were recognizing maybe some of the gates and the barriers that the Writing Center itself experiences, especially around funding and transparency and things of that nature. And we weren't able to move beyond that, right? So we could just say like, well, we don't know, right? And that was frustrating. But I think also it brought that to the fore for the leaders of our center.
Other questions? Other questions? Either in the room or online.
We got online.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any advice for employees of units on campus where the unit leadership level is at a level 0 or 1?
Is there anything that immediately comes to you all's mind? I mean, I like one thing comes to my mind, but anything immediately? Okay. I'm kind of like, I'm thinking about Kelvin's work. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like we're among friends, but yet like this is being recorded and sent to everywhere. So this is like, we're not really just here alone. Sometimes you're like, are we recording? And the answer is yes, ! We are recording. But I think it's okay if I mention, there's a gentleman on campus named Calvin Alfaro who works with the Office of, Strategic Consulting? Yeah. And he came to us and was like, hey, I've developed this rubric that's around like insider versus outsider things. And I think some of the language like that you're using might set people off or whatever. And it wasn't a criticism. He's like, I've just been there. I've worked with people in the DEI space. I know there are going to be some people who totally get this, and other people are going to be like turned off by what you do. So I've developed this rubric that makes it a little easier to see yourselves, in this. And I mean, I don't want to read like between the lines. I don't want to assume where people are, but I just think there are maybe different entities that we would send them to, maybe before you do this rubric, and it might just be helpful to think about like, how are you being inclusive? How are you welcoming other people in your space? Are you an insider versus outsider thing? So I feel like Calvin Alfaro has developed a good rubric that might be a really good step one into this process. I am not an expert in all the DEI resources out there in the United States, in the universe, across the globe. I don't know. Maybe there are some great answers that even people in this room have. I'm like, if there's anyone who like wants to throw up their hand and be like, you should start here, great. Haley?
I would just also encourage folks to maybe either like look for solidarity with your fellow colleagues or in other spaces, or maybe you got to jump up a few levels of leadership, because there are supportive people at different, all these different levels of this really vast hierarchy we're in. And that's not encouraged, right? It's not encouraged to go above kind of where you're at. And that might be a good decision as well.
Yeah. I don't know. Send them to a training. I don't know. Send them to a retreat. Send them to the Diversity Forum, sponsored by DDEA, and then they could, learn something about themselves. I don't know. I don't have a great answer. Does anybody have a quick 30-second thing that they want to throw? Yeah, Sarah?
I would just invite that unit leader into a conversation.
Yeah.
Because I think it's not cool to assume you're correct without
Yeah.
having a conversation.
Yeah.
My experience is that very few people are actively against taking the role, and that a lot more people are paralyzed with doubt about their ability and the role that they can.
Yeah.
I disagree. I completely disagree.
We have a disagreement up here.
Oh, sorry.
Uh-oh.
I sit across this campus and higher levels of leadership, directors of units that have no interest in promoting people of color beyond their most minimal station. It's been happening for years. That's why we have to do things like this every day.
Okay. So we welcome transparency and mutual respect and all that stuff. So, I mean, yeah, different perspectives on the world. I appreciate that, everybody's not the same on this issue. We are out of time. Again, if you all are curious about wanting to implement the rubric, let us know. If you want to help make the rubric a better thing, let us know, because it needs work, as we know. And I just wanted to thank you all so much. Thanks especially to the departments and units. Just a special thanks to the Writing Center and Horticulture. All right, thanks, y'all.